and good morning, Catherine and Damien and Kenneth and Pat, and thank you for your presentations. I suppose on this committee we're more than aware of the importance of accessible transport, both public and private, and I suppose for many reasons. It's not like the motorised transport grant was for the purpose of retaining employment, but I think we've come to realise that, you know, transport is necessary for more than employment. It's also access to education, but even to shopping or socialising and so on, so that people can live independent lives. And I suppose the biggest issue is in rural areas. I live in a rural area myself, and if I didn't have personalised transport, I wouldn't get to many places. There is a local link service in the county, but it's quite sporadic, and some areas are well serviced and others aren't. And I've actually heard of many disabled people attending day services and accessing the local link, and they're not accepting their free travel pass, which is something I'm trying to get clarified, because I don't think that should be happening. You have talked about the motorised transport grant and the mobility allowance, and the fact that they were suspended 9 years ago, and with a promise of a new scheme. They actually gave the new scheme a name, but that seems to be all they've done. Damien, you mentioned as well the scheme in Britain, the Motability scheme. I've actually had some discussions with people around that scheme, especially in the north, because they can avail of it and have been for decades, and they find it a very good scheme. It's where you lease your car for a certain number of years, and your insurance is covered, the upkeep of the car is covered. So I'm just wondering if you are familiar with that scheme, or if you think it's a good scheme. Is it something that the Transport Group here should be considering, or are there other schemes in other jurisdictions perhaps that they should be considering as well, and would it work? Kenneth, you said you were at the initial meeting of this transport group, and I've heard from other groups as well. We're at the initial meeting, and that's concerning me, because I think that initial meeting was in January, and I'm not sure. I don't know what kind of work has happened since that. I'm hoping that there's lots of work going on behind the scenes, but I think there needs to be consultation with groups such as yourselves and others, because the members of the Disabled Drivers Medical Board of Appeal actually appeared in front of the Finance Committee back a couple of months ago, and they were engaged with, I think, once or twice as well on the transport scheme, but that was it. And it was like they were asked for their submission, and then after that I don't think there was much happening. I'm also concerned about the whole appeal board, because they resigned at the end of last year. There's a lot of people who have applied for primary medical certs, have been turned down, have appealed the decision, are awaiting, and they're asking me, well, why, how long are we waiting? I said, there's no board of appeal there. I've put in PQs around, you know, what's happening there. They advertised, or the Department of Health looked for new people to go onto that. There's no applicants. And I mean, people who were on that said they're not surprised, because the criteria was so stringent. They were promised a review by the Minister for Finance. That review has not happened. So it's really concerning. But people are applying for that scheme because it is the only scheme, and most of them won't qualify because the criteria is so stringent. So I think what we need is a completely new scheme that covers all levels of need. And I know I can understand your concern that if that scheme was actually found to be too complicated, and it would just be suspended like the others, and that's something we don't want to see. But I suppose, you know, my questions are, the consultation is really important. Just, I know of people, disabled people, who've been consulted with by the National Transport Authority, by Dublin Bus and so on accessibility, have engaged only to have their suggestions and submissions ignored as well. So we don't want consultation just for the sake of a box-ticking exercise. It needs to be meaningful, and those suggestions that come from disabled people need to be taken on board. But anyway, thank you for your presentations here this morning.
You mentioned about the scheme in Britain. I'm only familiar with it through families like ourselves who are in the same situation. We're part of a support group where a lot of families come together with the same condition as my girls have. And a lot of families, the Motability scheme over there is very useful for them. At a very nominal cost, maybe a few hundred, it might have gone up to maybe 1,000 or 2,000. They can change their vehicle every, I think it's 3 years now. Yeah, it's a vehicle of their choice rather than one imposed on them. It's a vehicle that meets their needs rather than somebody else saying what you want. And the amount they pay is minimal, and then the scheme, as far as I know, their insurance and tax is covered as part of it, and any repairs that need to be done is covered for them as well. that would be, something like that would be very advantageous to hear. So as far as I know, the families don't actually own the cars, but at the end of the 3 years, they can just hand it back and then they qualify for a new one. And I think the same, you pay money again, but again, it's a minimal amount. As opposed to ourselves, you buy the vehicle, as far as I know, you can't lease it. You have to actually purchase the vehicle for as passengers. You cover the cost of it. Your VAT is given back. Yes, as part of the scheme, the tax is covered for the vehicle, which is very appreciated. But you cover your own insurance. You cover all costs in relation to insurance and everything else and repairs. So, and they're huge amounts. In our own case, it's very hard to actually get insurance for a vehicle like ours. As far as I know, AXA are the only ones that will cover it. I've tried numerous people to see can I get a cheaper quote. It's not available that I'm aware of. And then, obviously, because of you can't really afford to have any difficulties happening to the vehicle, you have to maintain it, obviously, according to garage specifications. And you'd hope with new vehicles, the kind of mechanical input you have to have into them afterwards is very limited. Sometimes you're very lucky, just the regular yearly service. Other times you're banjaxed. Something goes wrong and you're gone. I had a problem recently with a hoist. I had to change hoist, and then the new hoist I got let me down with the girls stuck in the van, and I couldn't get them out. So that was an emergency for us. So the cost of hoist and stuff like stuff you manage for yourselves afterwards, the maintenance of it, the repairs, the servicing, all of that. So a scheme like the mobility scheme in England could be very useful to look at here. I don't think any carer or anybody expects to get something for nothing, and we don't. I mean, we're happy to pay reasonable amounts of money, but bear in mind we're coming at it from a different point of view. We're already, pardon the pun, disabled in the sense of the people we look after. We're disabled in the sense of the money we're allowed to earn before we lose any abilities, and it's all capped. So the amount of money you have available for all of these what are termed luxuries, they're not luxuries, they're essential to have any kind of freedom as a family, is very limited. So you're all the time looking over your shoulder and looking in your pocket. Have I got this? Can I plan for the cost of this? And if I don't, how am I going to manage? And the last thing any of us want to do is depend on charity or on the kindness of others or the kindness of strangers. We shouldn't have to do that by any means. Yet we're so lucky that people are so generous. And yes, we are lucky too that the state, in a sense, is generous for what they give us. But in all honesty, it's not really enough for our current needs and the needs of people. Never mind those who don't qualify on a technicality and whose needs are as great or if not greater. And again, we go back to our families, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, who just, obviously they can't be drivers themselves, but their needs for transport are just as great. Just have an ordinary day's activity, be it they won't go to work, but to go to school, to go to day services, to attend medical appointments, whatever else. And what you want is a degree of autonomy for families to give them that freedom. You know, in 10 years' time, I'm probably going to be too old to drive. I'll be 75. But my girls' needs won't have changed. So how we provide the services we provide now ourselves may be very different. But I don't know, I'm afraid to even think of what that might be, because, as I say, you can't get onto 25A with 2 wheelchairs. A lot of day services don't provide transport, so it's left back to your own means. So something that addresses those kind of issues. And Senator Seery asked, like, one thing can we offer back to them? Listen to families, listen to the needs, not what somebody else understands the needs to be, or somebody in an office in town. Listen to the families, and they're very different in different parts of the country, because it depends what supports are available in different places. We talked about the postcode lottery in relation to service provision, likewise in relation to transport. And nobody's looking for anything exorbitant. They're just looking for the same opportunities as other people have. You know. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
A very quick one just to add to what Damien said. If you look at carers allowance, and in the last budget, they raised the income disregard for savings from 20,000 to 50,000. So, but still, we're capping carers, putting money aside for things that they will need for the future care of loved ones. So, you know, Damien's van €50,000. That would be his savings gone in one go, you know. So I think we need to look at the broader picture in terms of, for families, whether it's the person with the disability or the wider family, stop penalising them and start really supporting them, not just financially, but also through adequate supports. And quite often the financial strains are there because the other supports are not in place, like respite, like day service, like transport to and from. So we need to look at it, I suppose, and from our perspective at family carers and how we support them to care safely for their loved ones in their own home. And that includes the right to transport for the person with the disability and the right for the carer as well to have their independence and their lives as well. So.
Basically, there's that payment, that mobility payment that, as I said, I think it's around 2 million people in the UK get. About a third of those then convert that mobility payment into a lease payment. So they're allowed to use that payment to lease a vehicle through the Motability scheme. And Motability, just to give you an example, is probably the largest leasing company in Europe, anyway, certainly. I think we had a meeting with them there. I think they lease 800 cars a day. Okay, so they're very big, and in doing that, they have the government allows them to buy those cars VAT exempt, and then they have huge negotiating power with the vehicle manufacturers, the insurance companies, and car maintenance companies. So then they lease that car fully insured, fully maintained for a period of 3 years, and then end of 3 years they take the car back and they put that on the resale market. About 10% of that 700,000 or whatever cars that they have are actually highly adapted. So a lot of their cars will go back into the general market. And what maybe you don't realise is that we depend to a huge extent in terms of our supply of vehicles that you see coming through the various suppliers are actually vehicles coming off the Motability scheme in the UK. These are the ones that are finished lease or maybe finished lease early or were handed back for various reasons that go on to the general sale market that end up here. And so those not new vehicles with lowered floors and wheelchair accessibility and various adaptations on them that are on the market here are actually the second-hand or out-of-lease cars coming from the UK, coming in, and they're a big factor in our supply of, because we just don't have the infrastructure to build those cars in a kind of a mass way here. We just don't have the population. So we're depending on that supply. So in terms of our relationship, Brexit hasn't been great for us in terms of how that supply and that low cost supply. In other words, people don't have to go from new. They can get a fairly good vehicle at a reduced cost coming from the UK. So that's a big factor in terms of our supply. But that's the way it works. You convert that, you can supplement it if you need more in the vehicle, and then they have an equalisation process where they sort of equal things out. And if you've got something that has a high adaptation, essentially the person who has a lower adaptation is sort of contributing to that, so that everybody kind of pays the same amount. There's a kind of an equalisation factor in it. But they have big numbers and they allow to do that. Again, whether an arrangement could be reached with them, probably more difficult in the political circumstances, but that's how it works.